Thank you for joining me today. My name is John Doolin, and this is Casual Conversations. I'm here today with Lieutenant Colonel retired Oakland McCulloch, who is the author of Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. And Oakland, if you would take just a few minutes, introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on the show, John. I've been looking forward to this. And we were just talking about first ID stuff because we both served in first ID before the show started. So I spent 23 years on active duty, retired a lieutenant colonel, spent a lot of time, like normal, every 2 years you move, spent a lot of time in the States, spent some time overseas. I did a couple operational deployments. I did Desert Shield, Desert Storm with the 24th ID in 1990, 91. And then I also did a Bosnia and a Kosovo tour. Kosovo was with First ID. And then did a couple disaster relief operations. I was deployed for Hurricane Hugo in Charleston and Hurricane Andrew in Homestead, Florida. And when I retired from the food bank, from the Army, I ran a food bank for a couple years. I was the associate director running the day-to-day operations of a food bank that covered 52 counties along the Gulf Coast of the United States. So the whole Gulf Coast of Mississippi, the whole Gulf Coast of Alabama, into the panhandle of Florida. And I took over that job about a month and a half before the BP oil spill. So I was a little busy during that time. And then they invited me to come back and recruit for Army ROTC, and I couldn't turn that opportunity down. I did that for the last 12 years and retired from that on 1 October. And now I'm just out. Really, my passion now is to get out and speak to as many people as I can about what good leadership looks like. And I want to write my second book.
Oh, well, that's interesting, and I'm looking forward to asking you some questions about that I hadn't prepared you for. So, just for those watching who have no military background, no military exposure, I do want to let you know I dress this way on purpose. The 1st Infantry Division is on my cap, and it has some family significance to me. I joined Army Reserves in Syracuse, New York, back in early '93, and went off, served at a medical supply unit there in upstate New York, went off to basic training, advanced training, came back home, and I was bit. And I'm like, I got to go active duty. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I went back to MEPS, and they're like, well, technically you've got to re-enlist. And so they said, where do you want to go, Kansas or Korea? And I said, well, I want to go to Fort Drum. It's just down the road. And they said, yeah, that's not an option. You can't, Kansas or Korea. And I actually struggled with the decision. And what got me was they said, well, here, we'll have you watch a video on both. And they played the Kansas video first. I saw the patch, recognized the patch because my father served with the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam, and it was a staple of my life at that point for the previous 18 years, where my dad had the pins, the patches, everything.
Right.
And I never really understood when he had a bumper sticker that said, if you're going to be one, be a big red one. I didn't really know what that meant, and I should have asked. Then my uncle joined the Army and got deployed to the first Gulf War, where he served in the Big Red One, 1st Infantry Division as well. So the moment I saw the patch, I didn't need to watch the Korea video. I just called the recruiter back in and said, let's sign the papers. I'm going to Kansas. And I will tell you, I was told by the recruiter how exciting that is because it's so much warmer in Kansas than it is in upstate New York. That is false. It certainly is hotter in the summertime.
Yes.
About the temperature of the sun, but then in the winter, it is the absolute coldest place I've ever been in my life.
Yeah.
And so, there's nothing stopping the wind. But had some great years there, loved it, had a great time. And I left Fort Riley in 1997 and then went to K-State, where I joined the ROTC program there. And then, yeah, so the rest is history. I did not finish with the ROTC program. I believe I ended up dropping out and just going to work. And so years later, I finished all that up, graduated from Kansas State University in my 40s. So anyway, I'm excited to talk about your book. And so just so everyone is aware, Oak and I met on LinkedIn. Um,
Right.
I got a message saying, "Hey, have you read my book?" And I thought to myself, that's a strange question. I wonder why. And of course, immediately I thought maybe I wrote something that was strikingly similar to something in his book, and he was curious. And it wouldn't be the first time. I've had a lot of people reach out to me after I've written something and posted it, asking if they were the inspiration behind what I wrote. And so Oak sends me his book, and I read it, and I realize this is exactly why he asked if I read his book. Oak and I are, there's a chance we're separated at birth. Who knows? Um, very similar leadership style, very similar mentorship style. The truth is, I could have written this book.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I'm in the process of writing a book myself, and the interesting thing is it was inspired by quotes, which we're going to talk about here in this show. Um, but it's morphed into something a little bit different, and we can talk about that after we're done, because I'm so curious to know just more about your process and how you arrived where you arrived. So just out of curiosity, Oak, can you tell us about the process when you decided to write a book? How did you go about doing that?
Yeah, well, let's start with I had wanted to write that book for a long time. My last assignment on active duty, I ran an Army ROTC program at the University of South Alabama in Mobile. And I loved it. That probably the best job I ever had in the Army, helping to produce that next generation of leaders, not only for the Army, but for the nation. And so as I was doing that job, I didn't have a recruiter, so I went around and recruited on my own. And so I went to a lot of high schools and talked to a lot of college students. And I said, so what do you want to do? What do you want to be? And they all, they would all tell me what they want to do for a profession. And then they would say to me, I'd say, so, well, and then they'd say, and I want to be a leader. And I'd say, well, that's great. The world needs some good leaders. What does that mean? What does it take to be a leader? And you get that deer in the headlights look. They had no idea what it meant to be a leader. They thought they wanted to be one, probably for all the wrong reasons at that point, because they wanted the title, they wanted the privileges, they wanted the better pay. And let's face it, leaders get those things generally, and that's okay, as long as that's not the only reason you want to be the leader. Because if that is the only reason, you need to go do something else. So I've been given that presentation. I came up with a presentation, and I've been given that for the last 20 something years. And I always knew I wanted to turn that into a book, because, I've got about 20 things I can talk about. But, in a 45-minute, hour-long presentation, you can't talk about a bunch of things. You got to narrow it down. So I just took all those things and put it into a book. And it's funny, I knew I wanted to write that book, and I've been talking about it for a long time. And then my wife and I and her mother and two other people that live in the condo here with us, we went to a motivational / how do we grow revitalize the Catholic Church talk at our Catholic church. And the guy who was talking at it was a fantastic speaker, Jonathan Fanning, a great speaker. And he talked it was a 3-hour long event. Now, he didn't talk for 3 hours. He talked for 45 minutes, took a 15-minute break, 45 minutes, took a 15-minute break, and then the last 45. But every time he got done talking and he took a break, I went up and I picked his brain, because he was doing what I wanted to do. He was talking to people about leadership and about success and motivation and all those things that I talk about. And he gave me all kinds of good advice and some good nuggets that I took away. After the last talk, we talked for a few minutes, and then he turned around. We said our goodbyes, and he turned around and started to walk away. And then he turned back to me and he says, "Oak, have you written a book?" And I said, "No, but I'm thinking about it." And he said, "Stop thinking about it and write it." And so I went home that night. That was the 15th of February, 2020. Went home that night, wrote out the table of contents. Next day, I started writing it, and I published it on the 12th of February, 2021. So just under a year from the time I started till the time I published it. And I guess I just needed permission to do it, I guess. I don't know.
Sometimes you do.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple people like that in my life as well so far who know what I'm working on and have said, just get it done.
Yeah.
So, how did you go about the process of finding a publisher?
Yeah. So, that's interesting. Anybody who's ever gone through that knows that that's not always a fun process. So obviously nobody's going to pay me to publish my book. I'm not Obama or Clinton or any of those people, thank goodness. So they're not going to pay me to publish a book. So I knew I was going to have to pay somebody to publish it. So I interviewed, I think there was 12 different publishers I interviewed. Well, I interviewed 11, didn't like any of them, and the prices were everything from $5,000 to $25,000, $30,000, depending on what you wanted from them. And I didn't like any of them, mainly because I just got the feeling they didn't care about my book. All they wanted was my money. And that just didn't set well with me. So I was really struggling who I was going to have publish it. And then a friend of mine said, well, Oak, I've got a friend, a one-man publisher here in Florida, who maybe he would like to publish your book. And he gave me the guy's name and number, and I called him. And I said, I'd like for you to publish my book. And he said, not so fast. He said, send me 3 chapters. He said, if I like what I read, I'll publish it. If not, you got to go somewhere else. And that hit me. I found the person who really cared. He didn't want to publish something, even if it was junk, just for money. He actually cared about what he was publishing. And he and I hit it off right away. From that moment on, I knew that I was going to have him publish it. The only disagreement we had was the cover of the book. He said, Oak, I don't like the cover. I want you to take some snapshots, some pose shot. I said, no. I said, listen, Dan. I said, either that's the cover of the book or you're not the publisher. And so he gave in. Yeah, and so that's the cover of the book. But other than that, he and I saw eye to eye. I made it sure he understood that I didn't want him to change my voice in it. I wanted people who had heard me talk to hear me when they were reading the book. And I think he did a pretty good job of it.
So great transition. There's an audio version, which personally I love. It's the reason that this YouTube channel exists. Just a very quick story. I was sitting behind my computer one day and my wife was talking to me about something that was up on the screen. I said, I don't know, it's a post that somebody tagged me and they want me to read it, but it's too long. And my wife said, what? Are you kidding me? You write these long form posts every day, but you don't want to read somebody else's? And I said, well, it's not that I don't want to. It's just, it's really long. I don't have time right now.
Yeah.
And she said, how many people do you think you're alienating? I'm like, by not reading their stuff? What do you mean? And she's like, no. She goes, your learning style is audio and video, but yet you write. How many of your people are you alienating because you're not putting your content out there in a format that they can consume? And right. I thought, that was about a year ago. And I thought, she's right. And so I launched the YouTube channel about a year ago. Haven't been as consistent to it. It's my goal for 2024 is I'm gonna stick to my disciplines and do what I enjoy doing, and I enjoy doing this. So
it's amazing how much smarter our wives are than us, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I'm not surprised. The moment I start to forget, she'll remind me.
Yeah.
So, Oak, what does that process look like? How did you go from having a written book to being able to produce and publish an audiobook?
Yeah, and again, it's kind of the same story as you. I had no interest in publishing an audiobook, and my wife said, "You have to." She said, "So many people today, that's how they read books is through audio. They don't even want a hardcover book or a paperback book. They want to listen to it when they're driving in their car, when they're cutting their grass, when they're doing housework, whatever it is they do, that's when they listen to their content. And so I said, okay. So I started looking around for a studio that I could do it at. And there happened to be one here, just about 15 miles from my house. And so I went up to him and I set up an appointment. I went and talked to him. Again, I wanted to get to know the guy before I said, yeah, that's who I want to work with. And got along with him just fine. And I said to him, he said, so who's going to do the reading? I said, well, I was hoping you were going to. And he said, well, I can. He said, people pay me to do that. He said, but why? He said, it's your book. He said, let me just put it to you this way. When I'm looking for an audio book, if the author didn't read it, I don't even bother with it. Because obviously, if it wasn't good enough for the author to put the time in to read it, then why should I read it? And so that stuck with me. So I agreed to do the reading. The only other voice in that book is my wife's. She did the foreword because she wrote the foreword for my book. So I wanted her to read it on the audiobook, and she did the about the author on the audiobook. Everything else is me. And I think it took about 8 hours of in the studio, reading, correcting, splicing stuff, whatever, making all the corrections and stuff. And for a 3 hour and 45-minute book. So I thought it went pretty well.
So I want to touch on that. My wife is a voice actor for Audible, and voice actors for Audible are also editors and producers. And so I'm very familiar with that process. She's pumped out about a book a week, and that's about it. If whatever length the book is, it generally takes about twice that time to actually record it and edit it. But so the studio you went to, I want to applaud that person. I hope at some point that person sees this video, because I have, obviously having a voice actor in the family, I'm all for anybody who doesn't want to read their own book. Obviously, our family benefits from that.
Yeah.
But I'm such an advocate for people telling their own story.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that one of the stipulations I have for my own content is the book will not be released until the audiobook is ready to go, and I have video content to go with it, so that I'm not alienating anybody from my audience.
Yeah.
Anybody who has my learning style can day one enjoy the content.
Yeah, and I wish I would have done that. If I give advice, and somebody, I was just talking to somebody the other day, was asking me about some advice about writing a book, and the advice I gave him was that have it all come out at the same time, the hardcover, paperback, ebook, audio, all at the same time, because there's just so many people out there, and there's plenty of people who just want an ebook. They don't even want the audio. They just want the ebook. And so you got to have all those options out there so that people can, like you said, people who learn different ways and get their content by different ways have that option.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So you talked about you wanted to write this book to communicate your message. What I'm curious about is, from a leader's perspective, we want to communicate our message. We want to communicate who we are, what we stand for, what we believe in, and motivate others to live better, to try harder, to work longer, at their goals. I'm curious, Oak, outside of wanting to communicate your message, what was your hope? What was your desired outcome? If you could have picked your audience, which, we all know we don't get to pick our audience is who shows up to hear us.
Yeah.
But if you could have, that's what I want to get to, is really the root inspiration of the book. And if you even had that.
Yeah, I did. And, because I had spent so much time in ROTC, being a professor of military science, running a program, helping to produce lieutenants out of that. And then as a recruiter here for the last 12 years, I really thought that the primary audience would be young men and women who either were just starting as a leader or aspiring to be a leader. And I think I hit that. I think, from the feedback I've gotten and the reviews on Amazon from young men and women, I think that certainly I hit that mark. It is a book that can help a young developing or aspiring leader to learn some lessons early on that they don't have to learn that we learned. But then, it really made me happy. I got an email, or actually it was a message on LinkedIn from somebody I was connected with on LinkedIn, a 2-star Marine Corps general who I had never talked to. I sent a couple messages. We'd sent messages back and forth, and he decided he wanted to buy the book, and he did. And he sent me a message after he read it, and he said, Oak, I didn't learn a whole lot of new things. He said, I learned a few new techniques that I can use. He said, but the one thing I took out of your book was I would read along and I'd read something. And he said, I would say to myself, I used to do that really well, and I don't do that so well anymore. Maybe I need to dedicate some time to get back to doing that. And, so that kind of brings home that a message I've always said is, I don't care how long you've been doing this leadership thing. You can always get better. You can always learn something new. You can always be that better leader. And you owe it to the people that you have the privilege to lead to be the best leader you can be. You owe them that.
Yeah. And, Oak, being in the military and being in the civilian world, all too often, it's so easy to forget these basic things that we, as you said, we owe it. When you take that leadership opportunity, you touched on this earlier. You said if you don't want to serve people, paraphrasing your words, then you shouldn't be a leader.
Absolutely.
And, some of the best leaders that I've ever worked with have said point blank, never give power to the person who wants it.
Yeah.
There's a problem there.
Yeah.
And when you absolutely owe a debt of gratitude to the people that you serve for the honor of serving them. And I think that's something you have to constantly earn every single day. So Oak, the quotes that you use in the book, I've been a quote guy for years.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and every office I've ever had where once we started hanging TVs on the wall, I would go out and get flash drives, and I would always create my own memes back before it was a thing. Whether I did it in PowerPoint or I found quotes on the internet, wherever.
Yeah.
I would always throw them, anything that meant something to me, I'd throw them on this drive. I'd make copies of this and I'd plug it in the back of every TV that I could, or I would hook that TV up to a computer so that my quotes would spin all day long, with the obvious intent of just trying to motivate people, try to lift them up.
Absolutely.
Because you never know when that one quote is going to be the one they need to see that helps them get through a tough time.
That's right.
And so my journey started there. That's where I started writing based on motivations from quotes. And anybody who has been in any of my offices for the last 20 years has seen this. Some people make fun of me for it. Others take pictures of the ones that they like.
Yeah.
And so the question I have for you about the quotes is the origin of the quotes, because it's clear throughout the book that the tone of the chapters, the tone of the lesson are somewhat inspired by the quote. And I'm kind of curious to know the origin of that, or if it was the motivation and the inspiration, or if it was establishing credibility with a lesson.
Yeah. So I've collected quotes since I was in high school. I always talk about keeping a leadership journal because I believe in that. And I've kept quotes in there for many, many years. I've probably got about this many quotes, paper. And so the quotes didn't motivate the chapter, but I wanted to make sure that I just didn't throw a quote in just because I liked the quote. I wanted to make sure that the quotes actually went with what I had written to hammer home what I was trying to talk about. And I think, from talking to other people, I think that I did a pretty good job on that, because everybody seems to like the quotes that went with the chapters that I came up with. And I have my favorite people. I think there's two Vince Lombardi quotes in there, and there's, a couple, at least one Teddy Roosevelt quote. I love Teddy Roosevelt quotes. And so not all of them are. Not all of them are military. In fact, most of them aren't military people. They're civilians, coaches and businessmen and motivational speakers. I used a couple that, you hear motivational speakers use. And then the one quote in there, of course, Master Sergeant David Powell, who that's my favorite quote of all the quotes I've ever had. And talking about your office, ever since he said that quote, I had a sign made, and it's hung in every office that I've ever had since then. And the way that quote came about is he worked for me, and I say he worked for me. He was probably a better leader than I was. But he worked for me when I was running my ROTC program. He was the senior NCO. And one day we were talking about the significance of what we were doing, helping to produce that next generation of leaders for the Army and for the nation. And he looked at me and he said, sir, great leadership handed down from generation to generation is what develops great nations. And I thought, wow, what a powerful quote. And you know what the most powerful quote, I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. That's Master Sergeant David Powell, who I still stay in contact with, a great man, great Christian man. The most powerful part of that quote is that you can take the word nations and you can substitute anything you want for that: family, community, hospital, food bank, university, business, whatever it is you want. And it doesn't change the power of that quote one bit, because every organization needs good leadership. And the quality of that leadership in that organization is what's going to determine how successful that organization is.
Yeah, I love that. And since you brought him up, I want to skip ahead in my notes to David Powell. And here's the thing. You mentioned him in the book, but obviously anybody watching this can tell that he means a lot to you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to take just a moment to talk about him and the impact of his legacy. And the reason it stood out to me is, we have those people in our lives, and sometimes we are those people in other people's lives and we don't realize it.
Yeah.
And so if we could, I would like to just take a couple minutes, if you're comfortable, and just talk about who is David Powell, how'd you meet him, whatever background you know about him, and where is he today?
Yeah. So, I'll start with him, but then I'll talk about another NCO that I give all the credit, or a lot of the credit, for turning me into, helping to turn me into the leader that I was. But I met Master Sergeant Powell when I took over the Army ROTC program. He was already there, and his background was he was a Ranger with the 75th Ranger Battalion, served with them many years. And right before he came, I believe it was right before he came to South Alabama to the ROTC program, he was stationed at the Florida phase of Ranger School. So he was an RI. So he was teaching students at Ranger School. And so I quickly realized, he was the guy that I wanted to teach my MS3s, that the cadets that were getting ready to go off to the advanced camp and get graded on their performance out there. And as soon as I did that, I mean, the next year you could see the scores. Every year he was there. He was there for 2 of the 3 years that I was there. Those next 2 years, the scores just went up. So he was obviously doing a good job, and all the students loved him. All the cadets loved him. He was hard. They didn't always like what he did, but they realized that he was doing it for the right reasons, for their benefit. He stayed right there in the Mobile, Alabama area, and he runs a business now. He has a lawn care business that he runs, and stays very busy with. And Like I said, every chance I get when I get back to Mobile, and my daughter still lives in that area with my two of my three grandkids. So we try to get back there as often as we can. He and Master Sergeant David Powell, myself, and another guy that worked for me, retired Lieutenant Colonel Tim Ray, we all get together and have a coffee and tell war stories. That's old Army guys got to tell war stories.
That's what we do.
That's right. As part of what makes it worth going through. But and I do give Matt, I mean, I do believe he was as good or a better leader than I was, and I learned a lot from him. And that's, I guess, my point is, and I try to emphasize this during my leadership talks. You're the leader, you're the person in charge, no doubt about it. But there comes a time when you got to put your ego aside, and we all have egos. And that's a good thing, because egos is what drives us, makes us want to be the best we can be at whatever it is we do. We all have egos. Anybody who tells you they don't have an ego is lying to you. I'm telling you. But you got to know when to put it aside, because I don't care how good a leader you are or how good at whatever you do you are. There's always somebody who has some skills, some knowledge, or some ability that you don't have. And at that point, you got to step aside and say, okay, I know I'm a leader, but hey, you're really good at this. Take this and run with it and make this organization better. And I guess the first person who taught me that in my Army career was my first platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Pinson. I'll never forget Sergeant Pinson. 6'5", 250-pound boy from Mississippi, and he was a Southern boy, no doubt about it. But I took over when I got to the 24th Infantry Division. There were 3 lieutenants that showed up that day, me and 2 other ones, and there was 1 platoon leader spot open. So I remember we went and talked to the brigade commander. All 3 of us had a little interview. And for whatever reason, he picked me to be the platoon leader. And the other 2 went off to be in his staff for a little while till another platoon opened up. So I got introduced to the battalion commander, got introduced to the company commander. My platoon was already out in the field doing a dismounted live fire exercise. All morning they'd been practicing this dismounted, no ammo, just going through the motions of what was going to happen that afternoon. And I got there at lunchtime, and I got introduced to Sergeant First Class Pinson, and he grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, "Come on, sir, let's go have lunch. Grab an MRE. Let's go have lunch underneath this tree." And we walked over away from everybody else, and we're eating our MRE. And he says to me, he says, "Okay, sir," he said, "you're the boss. You're the leader. We will do things any way you want to do it." Here I am, a 24-year-old lieutenant. He said, "We will do things any way you want to do it." He said, "But I've been in the Army for 23 years. So he'd been in the Army almost as long as I'd been alive. He said, "If you're messing up, I'm going to tell you." He said, "If you still want to do it that way, we'll do it that way. You're the boss." He said, "But it's my job to tell you when you're about to mess up." And he did. A couple times he looked at me. I'd say I wanted to do something to him, and he'd look at me. He'd say, "Really? That's what you want to do?" I said, "Well, maybe not." What's your advice, Sergeant Pinson? And I'll tell you, he really did help put me on the right path as an officer, and I give him a lot of credit for that. So, because I think you can have mentors who aren't above you. There's nothing wrong with having a mentor who is of lower rank or lower, whatever you want to call it, lower in the chain of command or the food chain than you are. Because for somebody to be a mentor, you got to trust them. They got to have some knowledge of what it is that you do, and then you got to be willing to listen to them. And I was, again, put your ego aside. Somebody who has as much experience in the profession you're in as you are alive, you probably want to listen to that person.
Yeah. So as you're telling that story, it's interesting because, the civilian leadership chain of command is so different. It's all, Yeah, it's hardly ever would you expect for a 22, 23, 24-year-old college student to walk in and take over. And, it's the exact opposite. And what's interesting is you talk about the ego, it just wouldn't fly. You wouldn't have, um, because I see it every day. And I've been in that spot where, I did come in to an organization as a highly recruited, college educated, experienced leader, younger than the senior leaders that were now reporting to me. And I saw it firsthand where, they bucked the system. They didn't want to cooperate. They didn't want to do things the way that the business executives had decided, hey, here's how we're going to move forward. In the military, it's just the opposite. It's you execute the command as is given, or there's a process that's followed.
Yeah.
And in the corporate world, it's just so different. You talk about the toxic personalities in your book, and the in the corporate world, the toxic personalities survive and thrive because um, because of those egos, because people just want to assert their own will, versus taking care of the team. And
Yeah.
so I struggle a lot with, big fan of Jocko's, and the first couple of books of his that I read, I really struggled with because I thought, this is great theory if we're going to go ambush Al Qaeda, but if I'm going to try to use this in a warehouse or use this in a boardroom, it doesn't mesh real well. And so, he went and did the experiment with the business unit. I don't know if you've read this book.
I haven't read that one yet.
You can tell it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I don't know whether John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, or Jocko Willick's book are my favorite, but this one I have taken with me in all my travels in every warehouse I've ever launched, and I feel like it's a phenomenal life course for leadership, in the tactical execution of actual leadership. Now, he does still touch on some war stories in there, but a lot more of it is really tailored to the business world, and how different rank and structures can function effectively and put the mission first.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I've struggled with, because I understand the military style of, we are all soldiers on a mission, and there's a chain of command and there's a person in charge. And in the corporate world, you're not allowed to talk about age for, different reasons. But we never really even looked at age in the
Yeah.
military. You had these officers, you knew they were in charge. And to me, I never once looked at the first sergeant as being younger or older than the lieutenant. I always looked at him and said, well, in my eyes as a specialist, I said, they're equal. They're both in charge.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, from your perspective as the lieutenant coming in. I think you had a great first sergeant to sit you down and have that conversation, because a lot of the times, as I've aged and I've stayed in contact with a lot of my commanding officers, a lot of the NCOs have aged faster, obviously because they were already 20 years ahead of us. But I've talked to a few of them who've said, it was just the opposite. I absolutely poured salt in their game every chance I got. I sabotaged anything I didn't agree
Yeah.
with. And I thought, wow, like, I never saw it as a soldier. But years later, you hear them admitting to some of the things they did, from what you just talked about, from the ego perspective. They just couldn't adapt to the fact that literally someone who is probably their kid's age or younger is now their boss.
Yeah. But I think that I do believe that you can take a lot of the things that you learned, because I believe leadership is leadership. It's about people. And so if you can lead people, you can lead any organization. You definitely have to change the way you talk, or the way, some of those things, but the principles are all the same. But I think one of the things that's lacking in a lot of the civilian businesses today, at least the ones I talk to, and that I try to hammer home that you need to create, is, instead of an environment where people are coming and they're employees and they're coming to draw a paycheck, to do a job and draw a paycheck and go home, you try to build a community, kind of like we had in the military. And I think you can do that. It takes effort. It takes time, effort, even maybe a little bit of money to do, but you can do it because that builds that 360-degree trust. And, when I talk about trust, most people understand, the person I'm leading has to trust me. Yeah, but that's only one part. Now, that is a very important part, because if that doesn't exist, none of it else matters. Nothing else matters. So, the person you're leading has to trust you, but you also have to trust that person. And then everybody on the team has to trust everybody else that they're going to do the job they're supposed to do and do it right. And then if you're talking about the business world, especially, now you're talking about trust outside your organization. Do the people you're doing business with trust you, your organization, and do you trust that organization? Because if that trust isn't there, they're not going to do business with you. And I would hope that you wouldn't want to do business with them if you don't trust them. So when I talk about trust, I talk about that 360-degree trust. And that doesn't exist if you don't build a community, if you don't get people to actually know each other, get to know each other, start to talk to each other, and become almost a family, at least while they're at work. And when I talk to people about that, and I actually have people who try to incorporate it, they tell me how much of a difference that makes, even after a couple months, what a difference that makes in the work environment. And so I think it can be done. It's not mandated like it is in the military. That chain of command is pretty hard and fast. But I think you can come up with that if you really want to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I can attest to that. I have been a part of amazing teams, and it not even from the perspective of they got to know each other as humans and people, but they got to respect each other as teammates and the professionalism they bring to the team. And I will tell you that I've been a part of both teams, and the teams that take the time to care about the professional contributions, those are the ones that thrive.
Absolutely. One of the things I tell business owners is, recognition is one of the biggest tools that you have to motivate people. Now, it can't be the only thing you have, because you run out of, reward and punishment is how we train dogs. That's not how you motivate people. But it is important to recognize people. And I said, once a quarter, have a little luncheon in the office and recognize what things that people are doing. And when somebody does a really good job, just call everybody together during the workday and say, hey, John did a great job on this. Let's congratulate him. So those kinds of things are easy to do. They take an effort. I mean, you got to plan them, you got to do all those kinds of things, but it's not hard. And it might cost the company a little bit of money, catering a lunch once every quarter, but it's absolutely worth it. And you'll see a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree with you. Again, I've experienced that, and I can tell you that it absolutely works. So I have a question for you about mentorship. And in the book, you mentioned that you don't think everybody can be mentored. So what I'm curious about is, what do you do? What advice do you have when there's somebody in that situation where, you have a leader who is trying to mentor somebody and they're not mentorable?
Yeah.
What advice do you have for them there?
Yeah. So I think keep trying. So I think there's a couple things you can do. A couple of tools I've used, and I've had people that I just never could get to. But I think that number is small. If you keep trying, I think you'll get there. Now, you may not be the mentor, but they may find somebody. And that's what you got to tell people is, look, I don't care if I'm the mentor. You got to have somebody help mentor you, because it's so important. And as leaders, you need to mentor people. If you're not mentoring somebody and you call yourself a leader, I'm questioning whether or not you're really a leader. You might be a boss, but you're not a leader, because leaders mentor people. Now, you can't mentor everybody. I got it. But you gotta mentor as many as you can, as you have time to. But a couple of things that I use. Number one, do a lot of one-on-one. Not just, get to know the person one-on-one. not only about their job and what they do at work, but about their personal life. Take an interest in them. What's their spouse's name? What's their kid's name? Sports do their kids play? What's their hobbies? What do they like and don't like? So you start to build that one-on-one trust with them. And then do a lot of one-on-one, I'd say, not counseling, but kind of feedback on where you want them to go, what you see for them. Okay, these are the things I would like to see you do, because down the road, this is where I'd like for you to be a year from now, 2 years from now. And that, I think that really does go a long way to opening them up to being mentored, because some of those people might want to be a leader. Let's face it, some people don't ever want to be a leader. They just want to come to work, get their paycheck, go home. That's okay. As long as they're doing a good job and they're not causing problems, if that's what they want, good for them. It's not good for them. We'd rather they want to advance, but you can't make choices for people. But if you don't have a way, going to professional development and mentoring, if you don't have a path that's laid out that they can see, if somebody wants to be a leader in your organization and you don't give them that path where they see they can get there, they're going somewhere else. And you're going to lose your best people, because they're going to go somewhere where they have that opportunity to become a leader, if that's really what they want to do. So mentoring is not only preparing them for that job, but it's making them a better person, which then makes the organization better, which is in the end what a leader should want.
Thank you for that. And you touched on something that I want to just kind of a follow-up. So we talked about the unmentorable. What advice do you have for somebody who's being mentored and they're being mentored by the wrong person? How do you advise they work through that?
Yeah, so I tell people, if you're looking for a mentor, then a couple things you need to do. Number one, it has to be somebody you trust. And it doesn't have to be in your organization. It doesn't even have to be in your profession. And I tell people, especially CEOs, I tell them all the time, they say, well, I'm the top of the food chain. I don't have anybody else. I said, what do you mean? How many CEOs are there in this town? Well, none in my profession. Who cares? They're still making decisions. They're still leading. You can still learn something from them. You can get advice from them. I hate it when people say leadership is lonely. It's not. It's only lonely if you make it lonely. If you go out and find other leaders to take advice from and bounce ideas off of, then it's not lonely. You've got other people. So there has to be somebody you trust, even if it's not in your organization or your profession. And somebody gave me this, and what a great thing, and it's kind of stuck with me. First of all, you have to figure out what it is you want to be mentored on. If you want to mentor, you need to figure out what it is you want to be mentored on. Then go out and hang around with people who you trust, who have the knowledge you want, and get to know them, and then become part of that circle, and then ask them to be your mentor. And that's the other piece about mentorship is, I get especially young men and women who will tell me, well, nobody wants to be my mentor. Nobody stepped up to be my mentor. I said, then go find one. Because I promise you, there's somebody out there that wants to be your mentor. If nobody in your organization is going to do it for you, go find one. I promise you, there's somebody out there.
Yeah, that's powerful advice. And I have a few times in my career, point blank, had to go and say, hey, I like the way you do things. Would you please be my mentor?
Sure. I've done that.
Yeah. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Oak. And, I see that the clock is winding down on us. And I've got so many other things I want to talk to you about from the book. So I'm going to.
Well, I can always come on again if you want.
That's where I was going, Oak. And then not just that, there's a couple people. So, Oak, I do this thing when I record these podcasts where I like to just drop little nuggets, usually their names of people, just to see if they actually watch, because I get a lot of people who, and I've told this story a few times, the technology that I deploy for my daily newsletter, it actually tells me who opens it, who reads it. And, do I know that they read it? No, but I can tell if they've scrolled to the bottom,
Right.
because Substack keeps track of that.
Right.
And here's the only reason that it caught my attention was, um, I send it out at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I've had people give me very specific feedback that they receive it at 4:01 and that they wake up to read it when it comes out, which I think is awesome. I'm honored and
Yeah.
humbled by that. Um, but then I've had people and Substack also says, here's how long it should take someone to read this. And when I send it out at 4 o'clock, and on average it's hitting your mailbox at 4:01, and I get a like on it at 4:02, I know that that like is just because you like me, and it doesn't mean you've actually read my material,
Yeah.
which I'll take the like either way. Who cares? But so I like to drop little nuggets throughout here. And there's a couple people that I think would have a real good conversation with you, about some of these topics. I don't even think they have to read your book, um, to have an intelligent dialogue. And one of those folks is actually a NASA engineer. His name is Cullen, and I met him on LinkedIn as well. And he takes a engineer's approach to leadership. Uh, we've done a show together before. It's out there. You can go watch it. But I'd love to bring Colin in because I believe in real world leadership.
Oh, me
And
too.
and you've got Covey, and you've got Carnegie, and you've got Maxwell, and all of my heroes from the literary world. But we all know that when you go out that door, life actually happens. And
Yeah.
and you've written about some of it in your book, that people have events that alter their performance, that alter, their mind
That's called
frame.
life.
Yeah. And so I can't deploy the Carnegie methodology, or even Zig Ziglar, or they've all written textbook perfect life. Here's how things should go if
Yeah.
everything happens the way it's supposed to. I've never experienced that. I've
Yeah.
never once shown up to work and had everything go the way it's supposed to go, and said, okay, yep, according to the book, here's what we're supposed to do next. And so I would love to bring a group of folks together, and I'd like you to be a part of that, um, to go just a little bit deeper with the real world leadership.
Yeah.
Because you talk about it a little bit in your book, where you say, I want people to be like me. And the truth is, I want people to emulate being a good human.
Yeah.
I want
Absolutely.
I want people, but where I draw the line is, I've always tried to surround myself with people who aren't like me, and probably there's a little bit of ego there because I like to be the star of the show, um,
We
but
all do. And anybody who tells you they don't is lying to you.
yeah, but it's also because I like to be challenged. I like to have interesting conversations with people who are going to bring things to the table that I didn't know or didn't
Yeah.
think about. So I've now got you recorded as stating that you'll do that. There's a couple other
I will.
folks.
Absolutely.
Um,
And one of the things that I'm adamant, because you're absolutely right. I'm adamant because I don't talk about theory, leadership theory at all. I don't even think I mention it, that word theory, in my book. Theory is good, and leaders need to know leadership theory. I'm not saying that's not a good idea, but that doesn't make you a good leader. You can know all the leadership theory in the world. It doesn't mean anything. It's knowledge. Until you go out there and you actually lead in the real world, where you have to deal with people and their problems and their issues and their egos and all those other things that come up, that's when you become a leader. And one of the advice that I give all these young leaders over the years that I've had the privilege to help produce, and at current count, I think it's 586 lieutenants that one way or another I had my hand in helping produce for the Army and for the nation. I would tell every one of them, never, ever, ever turn down a chance to be the leader. If you have a chance to be a leader, be the leader, because that's how you get better at it. That's the only way you're going to get better at it. Just like riding a bike, you don't get better at it by thinking about it. You got to get out there and ride it. And it's the same thing with leadership.
yeah, I agree. So, Oak, where can people buy your book?
Yeah, so it is on Amazon and it's available in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and Audible. And you can also go to my website, and there's a button on there where you can go and it'll take you straight to the Amazon site. Or if you want a signed copy, on my website is my email and my phone number. Just contact me, or on LinkedIn, contact me, and we'll figure out a way to get you a signed copy.
That's awesome. Wherever you find this video, in the comments section, you will find the links to buy the book, to Oak's website, to his LinkedIn page. Oak, are you on Facebook?
I am. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, on X, and YouTube.
Okay, perfect. So all
And all
those
those links are to those are on my website as well.
awesome. Well, if you're watching this video, they're down in the comments section of this video as well. Oak, I'm really grateful that you reached out, that you introduced yourself. I can tell you there were so many times that, also, you can get the audio version of this on Audible, which I want to plug for, personal reasons, because my wife is an actor for Audible. Um, but I listened to the book as well, really because I wanted to hear the words in your voice.
Yeah.
And it, there were so many times where I just had that pause and I thought, wow, I could have written that. And I don't think I'd be the only one. So I really encourage you to go out, buy the book, whether you listen to the Audible or you read the actual book. And the one of the neatest things that I'd like to point out is he will actually sign the book for you. And then I hadn't seen this since my customer service days in Nebraska. We had this where we would stamp or emboss the page, which is pretty cool. That's how we would validate coupons back in the day, that the coupons were real.
Somebody did that for me when I think I was a captain, and I got a book from somebody and it had that in it, and I thought that is really neat. And so when I published my book, I made sure that I purchased one of those embossers to do that with. And every book that I sell from me, I can't do it from Amazon, but if you buy a book from me, you will get not just best wishes, my signature, but I'll write something in the book, and you'll get that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. So, Oak, grateful that you've given me the time today, and for those watching, grateful that you took this hour to spend with us. I think that getting to know Oak will absolutely be worth your time. And there's somebody out there who needs to read this. And don't be afraid to buy him a copy and send it to him. Oak, thank you again very much. And I just would encourage everybody, if you like what you see here, if you want to get notified when new videos drop, don't forget to hit the bell. You'll get a nice little notification every time I drop a video. And Oak, thank you very much again. Super grateful for the time that you spent with me.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, John. I was looking forward to it, and it did not disappoint.